Welcome to Fraud on the Go. This is the podcast for fraud fighters in the gig economy, and I'm your host, David Nesbitt. Today's episode is going to be all about scoring, and we're not talking about ratings or reviews, but actually internal trust scores for customers and drivers or riders or couriers, whatever you call them, on gig platforms. My guest today is Kunal Kumar. He's the principal product manager at Rebel Foods, and he's helped lead the development and implementation of trust scoring systems on both sides of the platform. So in this episode, we're going to explore how Rebel built their customer and rider scores, how those scores impact decisions like refund policies and rider allocation, and some of the lessons that they've learned along the way. So excited to jump in. And Kunal, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast.
Thanks, David. Pleasure to be here. Excited to spill some secrets from the kitchen of risk and resilience.
Absolutely. Okay, let's jump in. So first, just to kind of give some explanation, Rebel does use the term rider for what you might call a driver or courier on other platforms. So we're going to use that term today, but just so we know, that's what we're talking about, the driver, courier, rider side of the platform and the customer side. So let's jump in. Our first topic here is about designing a score. It's kind of what goes into this. And so I want to ask you a first question, Kunal, to get us started. What led your team at Rebel to start developing internal customer rider scores? What was the problem that you were trying to solve?
Well, Shakespeare's once said, suspicion always haunts the guilty mind. But in platform business, suspicion without data is just chaos. At Rebel, we saw abuse pattern repeating, COD frauds, location fraud, etc. And we realized that our customer delight team is spending more time firefighting rather than actually delighting the customer. That's when we realized there is a need for trust score, which is based not on gut or anecdote, but on solid data. The trigger point came when we realized multiple things. One, some customers, they were marked false positive, they were marked fraudulent while they were not. At the same time, we saw some of the fraudulent customers slip through. In fact, we saw some Reddit threads where someone was actually posting on ways of getting a Fasos wrap for free. And I think that was the trigger point when we decided that maybe we need a way to quantify the fraud and to make a comprehensive customer trust score.
Yeah, it makes total sense. You need something kind of concrete to act on. So you're not just depending on gut instinct or someone's decision making in a moment, but you've got something more of like a framework behind what you're doing. Help our audience think about, maybe people that are listening probably are at different stages. Some of them might use something like this. Some of them might not have, or not even thought about it maybe, or are building it right now. How do you think about the purpose of a trust score? What are the behaviors that you're trying to reward or discourage when you're creating a trust score?
So basically, we are not treating trust score as something that we use to penalize the customer. We think it this way, that most of our customers are genuine customers. They like ordering from our platform and we like serving them and giving them best possible experience. However, there always exists 1-2% of customers because of which probably some other customers may also suffer. Many a times, the customer support agents, they are the first line of defense, so to speak. And they, when interact with customers, there existed a lot of subjectivity where they would look at customer history, take judgment on the go. So we wanted to make this whole process very objective. There should not be any room for subjectivity. So basically what we are trying to do is we are trying to segregate our customers basis their intent of purchase with us. Basically, we want to reward customers who order frequently, who are genuine, etc. While at the same time, we want to create roadblocks or some sort of check for customers who are trying to or more likely to try game the system to get maybe orders for free, get discounts, etc. So that's the whole purpose of creating trust score or any sort of abuse detection mechanism. At the core of it remains customer experience, because once we segregate this 1-2% of fraudulent customer, we feel that we'll be able to serve our customers better.
So for the next question, I want to ask, when this idea was originally brought up at Rebel of creating the trust score, was there internal alignment? Was everyone on the same page internally, or did you have to build the case with other teams at Rebel about why this made sense and why now was the right time to do this?
Right. So we had a data, both qualitative and quantitative, along with multiple feedback that said that same type of customer may be treated differently based on an agent who is handling them, right? And of course, there were a lot of pushback. There were pushback because some of us feared that, the NPS score might go down. Some of us feared that maybe a lot of fraudulent customers may slip through, or on the other side, a lot of false positive will come up. Then again, different teams many a times have different KRA, and any new change in the process may impact someone's KRA. So it was essential to bring everyone on board. The good part was when we initially did a pilot, and also before pilot, when we simulated the data, we were able to kind of show everyone that it's probably a very small percentage of customers that are actually fraudulent. Also, we realized that probably less than 1% of our customers accounted for probably 14-15% of our refund. So once that data was shared, I think other stakeholders started trusting the process and they were on board. Also, we realized that it's a two-way door. We wanted to pilot it, and only once we had our success criteria met, then only would scale the pilot across all the geography for all the customers. So yeah, initial resistance was there, but eventually we built enough trust to bring everyone on board.
That's interesting. Internally at Incognite, we've talked about the idea that, a lot of your fraud comes from a very small percentage of your users. So let's talk a bit next about how Rebel Foods approached this, particularly building this. Could you start by walking us through what goes into your customer score, and then we'll talk about the rider trust score next.
Okay. Customer score, think of it as a multi-dimensional credit score for behavior. There's this usual RFM, recency, frequency, and monetary value. Then we layer in refund count, refund value, number of cancellation, device usage, location quality, etc. And there are a lot of other factors, but these are the main factors. And each signal tell us something significant about reliability of the customers. So for example, if you have ordered, say, 3 times in past week, never got a refund, never cancel an order, then you are good, probably have a very high trust score. On the other hand, if you order, say, once a month, and in 3 out of last 5 orders, you have demanded a refund or have canceled the order, there's something to doubt. So basically, what we do is, instead of asking our customers, or saying that by default we'll assume that customers have to order multiple times, be right always to get high trust score, we said that by default all the customers are good, and you have to do something bad for you to move down. So all the customers, when they first sign up to our platform, they start with a very high trust score. And if there are cancellations and other factors that I just spoke about, then gradually their trust score reduces. So based on trust score, again, we categorize our customer, their ideal customers, good, etc., all the way to abusive and very abusive customer. And of course, the treatment of these customers are different.
So innocent until proven guilty is kind of the policy of the
That's
idea
correct.
behind it. And
That's
this gets into kind of more the nitty gritty, but I'm curious, like, is it a number score on a 0 to 100 scale, or what's the scale that you use for it, out of curiosity?
it's a scale for 0 to 100, 100 being the highest.
Yeah.
Also, the weightages differ. Of course, some of the signals may have significantly lesser weightage. For example, if there's a 50-50 chance of whether either it's a mistake by customer or mistake by the kitchen or the rider, weightage of that signal is slightly less than if we have conclusive evidence that someone is trying to game the system. Obviously, weightage of that is much higher. So eventually, all the customers have a score from 1 to 100.
That's interesting. Yeah, thanks for explaining a little bit more. Interesting to understand more what goes into it. So let's turn the page over to the rider trust score. I'm curious, what signals are most important on this side?
Yeah, I think it's similar in philosophy, different in signal. So some of additional signals that we use, we call it GPS adherence or GPS fidelity, SLA compliance, and we took very seriously the customer feedback. So there's a metric that we track. It's called customer contact. Our North Star is to ensure that throughout customer journey, there should not be any customer contact. There's no need for customer to contact us through mail, call, chatbot, anything, right? So there are different buckets under contact also, some more severe than others. For example, signals like rider has marked the order delivered prior to delivery, etc. These are taken more serious than some of other buckets, right? So I would say GPS fidelity and customer feedback, these two are have higher weightage than many other signals. That includes, say, SLA compliance, route consistency, then other signals like device, if same number is used by multiple riders or a rider has multiple phone numbers, then GPS spoofing is a big signal for us. So yeah, these again weighted average, and riders are also scored, and each rider start at the same level, and based on these feedback they can either move up or down in the tier.
That's interesting. So GPS, you said like essentially the GPS accuracy is one of the things you track, and GPS spoofing separately. So GPS accuracy, can you talk about why that's important or how that factors in?
Yeah, I think there are three reasons why they are important. The first one is customer experience. So, and again, I'll deviate a little bit from the abuse angle, so to speak, and move a little bit towards customer experience. So, why GPS adherence is important is, number one, at any point in time, we want to be very transparent to the customer so that they know when is their order coming, what is their ETA. They should be able to locate their customer on the map. A very high GPS adherence, very accurate GPS signal ensures that our ETA predictions are right. The customers are able to see rider moving on the map. We don't want to end up in situation some of us might have noticed where riders start flying all over the map. So we don't want to end up in that situation. So that's number one, which is the customer experience angle of it. Second is for rider experience also. We want to ensure that riders are paid fairly. So if we have a good GPS accuracy, what we do is poll riders lat long constantly, let's say every 10 seconds, so that we can accurately map the route that the rider has taken. Now, by doing so, we want to ensure that riders are compensated fairly for the distance that they have traveled. In some of the cases, it might so happen that actual customer address is probably say 500, 600 meter away from the pin location. Also, sometimes on ground, there will be one way, there will be a temporary barricade that probably a Google map or any other map service might not be able to locate. In such situations, we have seen that while based on store to customer lat long, let's say a Google map will say that it's say 1.5 kilometer. In reality, a rider might be traveling say 1 kilometer more. And so we want to compensate them fairly. So these are the 2 points about customer and rider experience. And this brings me to third point, which is the abuse angle of it. As I mentioned, we want to compensate rider fairly, as the distance they have traveled, that also constitutes one of the components of their payment. Sometimes we have observed that riders either take a longer route, sometimes they deliver the order, but they don't market deliver. They probably travel to some other location and then they market delivered. In certain cases, we have also seen GPS spoofing. All these things are done to clock higher kilometer count than they have actually traveled, in which case they would be paid higher. So there is a trust angle also, an abuse angle also that we want to protect. So all of these things are related to GPS signal accuracy, and that's why we want to ensure that this is such a big signal for us.
Yeah, that makes sense. From a customer perspective, I can definitely relate to like watching the map. I'm trying to figure out how long it's going to take. Is the ETA actually correct? And I'm watching where they are. And so definitely if it's jumping all over, it's not accurate, it's not moving a long time, it's kind of can be frustrating from a customer perspective. And I think on the location spoofing angle, our team found an example of one of the platforms we were working with that they had like a driver accepting an order, and either right before or after accepting the order, I forget the order, they spoofed their location into like the middle of a large lake. Like you could see the location point in the lake. So clearly, they were either had some kind of a floating vehicle, amphibious, or there was some shenanigans going on. But makes a lot of sense, and interesting to hear how location plays into the trust score as well. So we've hit on segmentation a couple times, which I know super important topic. I think really interesting topic in this industry as people are trying to think about how do we make great automated decisions, quick decisions about certain things that are happening in the platform and about users and how to handle their activity. So I'm curious, I think every platform is going to have very different answers for this probably, or some varying answers for this, but how do you segment customers and riders into tiers? And how might treatment change based on that score or segment being different from another user?
Yeah. So first, for the base for segmenting them is always the score. For customer, it's customer trust score. For riders, rider scorecard or rider trust score. Now, there are two ways of segmenting. The simple is probably have a percentage-wise segregation, right? Top 5%, top 10%, so on and so forth. And second is obviously very strict based on number, that anyone having more than 90 customer score of 90, between 75 to 90, so on and so forth, right? Now, based on that, obviously, we name them as ideal customer, good customer, etc., etc. Now, for all of these tier, we have a mapped resolution workflow. So if you belong to a very high customer score tier, you'll probably, if there are any issues, if you reach out to our chatbot, you'll have probably a full refund, no question asked, and everything is automated. You'll be happy, etc. If you are somewhere at between, in certain cases, you might get a partial refund. In certain cases, you might be routed to a human agent who will do some investigation. And then if you are probably at the bottom of the spectrum, things will be stricter for you. There will be more surveillance, more checks, and most probably it will be routed to a human agent who will do due diligence. So that's the first part of it. The second part is, since we now have a customer score, we can go and use this beyond the normal, customer delight flow. For example, if I am launching some exclusive deal, I can target top tier customers. If I want to launch a new product, beta test it, probably I know who to target, right? So opportunities are endless once this code is created. Similarly, for rider, one clear use case is incentive. So instead of focusing and creating an incentive program based on just one metric, this in a way gives a scorecard where a lot of other factors are baked in. So top 5%, top 2% will get higher incentive. Similarly, when I have lesser number of orders and enough riders, I'll probably assign the order. The system automatically assigns the order to the riders with high rider score. Few things like bulk order, we always try to assign a bulk order to a high scoring. So these are some of the ways. I think still we have not explored everything that we can do with these scores. I think opportunities are endless, and we are still looking at ways where we can reuse the same scoring mechanism to ultimately treat our customers better.
That's super interesting. A question that came to mind as you were talking through that, do you ever expose your customer, like the segments, to the riders or the customers? Like, do you ever let them know that they're in a higher or lower tier, anything like that? Are there cases in which that's helpful?
For customers, no, we don't in a way tell the customers. However, these numbers are not fixed, right? So one can start at a number, move up and down. A customer today might fall in abusive category, but they can obviously have a way of redemption. So these move, but we don't explicitly tell the customers that this is their score or this is the tier they fall into. We do have a loyalty program, and of course, their customers know that this is the tier they belong to. And loyalty tier is also one of the signals that we use. But trust score is something that we have taken a conscious decision of not to tell the customers upfront.
That makes sense. I know on the rider side, driver courier side, I've heard of another platform. I think at some point they do let, like after a certain number of strikes, let's say for a violation, like an abusive behavior, then they might let the customer know that they're at the threshold of something to kind of like give them a chance to redeem, change their behavior. So it's just interesting to think about, what are the advantages of doing that? What are the disadvantages? One of the dangers you have is then people figure out how to game that, right? If you're a fraudster on a platform, as a bad actor on the platform doing fraudulent behavior, if I know I'm on the verge of being banned, I may be switched to another account. And so now I'm actually, it's actually helping me that you let me know because I know the right timing to switch up my approach. So kind of an interesting challenge and decision to make there. Okay, so I'd love to move on to our next section, which is about implementation and tuning. So at Rebel Foods, what did this look like? What are some of the best practices? And a first question I'm curious about here, how do you monitor, you just implemented this trust score on the driver or rider side. Maybe you're probably rolling it out with some smaller group first to make sure that you're not going to break everything. I'm sure it wasn't going to because you built it well. But how do you monitor if it's actually working like you intended it to?
Yeah. So we always track metrics. So obviously our North Star is to reduce our retention spend as percentage of net sales. So obviously we saw that getting reduced. We also track multiple secondary metric like refund automation, then decisions overturned by human agent, etc. But at the same time, we have few guardrail metric like CSAT and rating, etc. We don't want to end up in a situation where we reduce our retention spend by displeasing or reducing our customer CSAT. So we don't want to be in that situation. We would rather err on the side of caution. So these are some of the metrics that we track. In fact, we once we implemented it, we saw a massive reduction in retention spend, and at the same time, we saw our refund automation growing by 2x. So yeah, these are the metrics that we constantly track till today, at least on a weekly basis.
So break that down for me a little bit in terms of retention spend. Help me understand what goes into that and
Yeah.
why is measuring that a good indication of the success of your trust score?
Yeah. So I'd not say that retention spend is impacted by trust score or is a measure of how good my trust score is. That's obviously one part of it, but it depends on a lot of other factors. So basically, in case of any issue, how do we compensate the customer? Let's say an order has not been delivered, we would probably place another order for that customer. If the order is cancelled, the food is wasted, again, we have to take that hit. So all of these, any sort of refund, any sort of reordering, any cashback given, etc., all of these we track as percentage of our net sales, and that is a metric we call retention spend. So that shows us a how good is our trust score, because eventually this is built so that no one is able to game the system and we are able to catch the fraudsters in real time. Second, it also shows us how good is our process, because sometimes it's obviously not customers problem if we are not able to meet our ETAs, right? Or if we forgot to place or deliver all the entire order correctly, there might be some missing item, some wrong item, etc. So this particular metric, it shows two things: one, how good is our fraud detection capability, and second, obviously, how good we are in delivering order correctly and on time. So that's why this is probably our North Star metric in this regards.
That's super helpful. I wasn't familiar with the term, so that was helpful. Thanks for explaining through it. And could be helpful to some of our audience, maybe who don't use that same term or haven't thought about it that way. So you've implemented the score and you start to see how it actually works as you're rolling it out. Have you run into behavior changing because of the score? Like you said, you're not exposing that to them, but as they see maybe the behavior of the platform change and decisions change, have you seen behavior changing from customers or riders?
We have actually. So both on the positive side and on the negative side. Positive side, we have seen that obviously the metrics have improved. And also, as a fraudster, if you try very frequently to game the system and now you're not able to do so, after a point in time, you kind of give up and you try your luck on some other platform, some other issue. So we have seen some of those actually reduce. At the same time, fraud is always evolving. I just remembered an anecdote. There's a play, very old play, written in probably 5th century in India. It's written in Sanskrit language. A part of the story is there was a thief and he was finally caught and presented in front of the king. And king was so impressed by the creativity of the way he used to steal things. Among many other things, this was one of the things that impressed him, that he actually forgave the thief. So sometimes you can't help but be impressed with the creativity some of these fraudsters bring to the table. So we have seen some of these, they kind of figure out how the whole scoring system works. We have seen them cool down for a bit and again do the same thing. Sometimes they in a way try to behave like a regular customer, place 3 4 regular orders, and then probably go ahead and cancel the order or do something like that. So yeah, it's like a constant cat and mouse game, but I think this is one game where now we have a radar to catch them as quickly as possible.
That's great. Yeah, and love that reference of the play. I think from the perspective of like admiring the creativity of fraudsters, I'd say, it would be good if we had the same level of creativity applied to our work. Like if we're doing that,
Yeah.
if we're that creative with our own work, we're probably doing pretty well. Sometimes you just have to shake your head and like in kind of admiration for the creativity of the scheme, even as you disapprove of what they did. So I want to finish up our time by pivoting to talk about both the best practices that you and your team found, as well as some of the pitfalls. I always think it's interesting to find out, afterwards what was successful, but also like what were some of the mistakes? What are the ditches that you can fall into as you're trying to do this? And let's think of maybe people listening to this podcast that might be building this for their own platform right now, or they're thinking about it. How do we arm them with the right information to help them be successful? So I think you can help us do that. So first, let's start out with that question about mistakes. What are some of the common pitfalls that you would warn other people about when designing a scoring model like this?
Yeah. I have few points. First is we should not try to overfit for the recent trends, because in that case we'll be reactive. Second, and I think this is very important, the trust score should be very easy to understand for all the team, because you would want your CX team to completely understand the trust scores, how it works, what are the benefits, so that they can internalize it and they get onboarded with it. Third, again, I would say don't look at trust score as something permanent. It can change. And we should always launch and iterate, because as things evolve, fraudster, they bring a lot of new ways to abuse the system, game the system. We have to be on our toes to keep our systems and our models updated. So yeah, these three would be the common pitfalls that one should avoid.
That's great. That's helpful. Have you seen cases where the score flagged legitimate users? Like it said, it made a legitimate
Yeah.
user look like a non-legitimate user, or it failed to catch risky ones? Any
Yeah.
examples that you can share? Anything comes to mind?
There are many examples, but there's a funny one of false positive. So we were launching a couple of important features on a particular day, and we wanted to check the entire flow till the order is placed in production. So in our office, we were placing a lot of orders on production. We obviously spoke to a particular kitchen, told them that these are test orders, and immediately after placing the order, we'll cancel them. So that they don't end up preparing the order and it goes waste. So obviously, a lot of such orders were placed in the span of a couple of days, and the system actually flagged the entire office area as a potential risk area. So that was a funny one, but we managed to bake in these signals as well. So now we like for any QA, it's safe to place a test order on production without getting flagged for abuse.
Yeah, that's important. You don't want the whole team to have to go through that every time you do a big testing release. So actually, one question I thought of as we were going as well was, were there any signals that you leveraged in your rider or customer score that you realized were not helpful and you threw them out for whatever reason? They didn't actually help to reduce, the right metrics or optimize your retention spend. Curious, any examples that you have of that?
Not many, but this one, for example, one of the metric that or a couple of metrics that we track is what percentage of our orders we have delivered to within 30 minutes. And then the initial ETA that we call it PDT, promise delivery time. So as soon as you place an order, the first ETA that you get, it's called PDT. So we also track what percentage of orders are delivered within PDT. And we kind of use this signal also in rider score. But later on, we realized that probably that's not completely dependent on rider themselves, because a lot of factors goes behind how those ETAs are calculated. So maybe ETA is very aggressive one. The model is throwing a very aggressive ETA, which is not realistic. Then there may be delay in the kitchen because of so many other reasons. There can be a bad weather condition, anything on the road that leads to delay. So that was one we realized that it is not fair to judge a rider on how soon are we delivering the order. Of course, once the rider picks the order, and if the rider is not taking the prescribed path, etc., then obviously it's their fault. But in most of the cases, there's very little rider can do.
That's an interesting example. Thanks for sharing a specific one. So our last question I want to ask, if you were starting over this process of building this customer rider trust score, starting it over from scratch, what would you do differently the next time?
I would say I would focus more on storytelling, looking not only at the numerical value of the customer score or rider score, but try to get deep into what it actually signifies. Also, I would want to have better feedback loops. There's something that we have started doing. For example, earlier also we would audit our customer agent conversation, but of course we would only take a sample. Now with the help of AI, we audit almost 100% of our conversations. So that helps us giving a better feedback loop. So I think these two are the things that I would do first if I have to start today.
That's great. Well, thanks, Kunal, so much for joining me on the episode and talking through in such detail about the process that you all took to build your customer and your rider score. Thanks for all the examples you shared, the time you took. I really appreciate it. And I think our audience could really benefit from hearing this. No matter what stage they're at in the process or whether they have this or not yet, I think it's a great topic, super relevant. So thanks for joining today.